Now, the Three Martini Lunch with Greg Corombos and Jim Garrity.
And welcome, everyone, to the Friday edition of the Three Martini Lunch, along with Jim Garrity of National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. All good martinis to close out the work week for you. Good across the board. And, Jim, all of them are reason for us to be excited. The first two are really cool. First of all, let's start with Dan Crenshaw, the congressman from Texas, obviously well known to a lot of people, especially on the right, got a lot of attention for his very humble and gracious response to being mocked by Pete Davidson on Saturday Night Live for wearing the eye patch because he lost an eye in service to this nation, I believe in Afghanistan. But now, of course, he's a congressman from Texas. And Dan Crenshaw is one of those people who has the ability to actually distill issues pretty quickly. He doesn't need a long, meandering floor speech. He just needs a little saunter down the congressional hallways, as it turns out. So here he is with about a 2-minute clip here, just explaining what the Democrats are trying to do with a particular piece of legislation and why he believes the Democrats are being disingenuous with it and what the bill would actually do.
This bill is called Protecting Americans with Pre-Existing Conditions Act of 2019. Not too bad. We all agree we should protect Americans with pre-existing conditions. But is that what this bill is really about? Let's read the text. It's not that long. Beginning April 1st, the Secretary of Health and Human Services and the Secretary of Treasury may not take any action to implement, enforce, or otherwise give effect to the guidance entitled State Relief and Empowerment Waivers. And the secretaries may not promulgate any substantially similar guidance or rule. Okay, from the text you can tell that it has nothing to do with pre-existing conditions. So what does this have to do with? What they're referring to are 1332 waivers. What are 1332 waivers? These are basically innovation waivers allowed under the ACA. A lot of states have used them so far. States like Maryland, Oregon, Maine, Alaska. They use them for reinsurance programs because what we found out was that reinsurance programs are a much more efficient way to protect people with pre-existing conditions. Obamacare requires that you protect pre-existing conditions via the exchanges. Okay, well, when you do that, premiums rise for everybody. That's why all of these states have actually changed their programs, they've innovated. The Trump administration saw this and they said, why don't we make it even more flexible for states? Why don't we give states even more flexibility to both protect people with pre-existing conditions, but do it in a way that doesn't raise everybody's premiums? So then you got to ask yourself, why is this bill called the Protection for the People with Pre-Existing Conditions Act? Because this is the height of cynicism. This is the height of political cynicism. Democrats are trying to get people to think that we as Republicans are voting against this because they're trying to get people to think that we're against protection for pre-existing conditions. That's not true at all. We're against bad policy. And this is both bad policy and political cynicism.
Jim, this is great for so many reasons. Not only is he calling attention to a bad piece of legislation and a misleading piece of legislation, which is really designed to demonize Republicans for opposing it, Dan Crenshaw is one of these people that we really ought to have more of, people who can actually distill and articulate a conservative policy position and then use social media and the power that it has to go viral to really get a message out. So this is excellent.
It is. And I remember having a conversation with another conservative blogger a few years ago, and we both kind of agreed that there are a lot of Republican lawmakers and sometimes even, a decent number of people who right-of-center pundits and folks like that. And they begin with a 9th or 10th step of a 10-step argument. That there's kind of this assumption that you believe that illegal immigration is bad, or that the government spending should be limited, or that government debt is bad, or that that there is what a free market is and what it actually means. They jump in assuming you already know the terminology, and it works for your base. It works for people who are familiar with these issues and read the coverage and understand all this stuff. But for your average person who isn't that politically engaged, they're not going to get it. And so, what is this democratic law title designed to do? It's designed to it's about protecting people with pre-existing conditions. Who in their right mind can be opposed to that? And by the way, this is not an original thing. People have argued about the titles of bills being misleading. Obviously, lawmakers love to try to connect it to something that's, motherhood and apple pie. A lot of people might argue the Patriot Act is not particularly well titled. You probably could also make an argument that, You can always tell when someone has kind of worked the words together to try to create some sort of cool acronym. The title of a bill doesn't necessarily tell you what's in it. And, the fact that he's able to go in, read the text, and it sounds like, Greg, that's the entirety of the text. They didn't even throw in a little paragraph in there about pre-existing conditions. He explains why this reinsurance is good, why it works, why it doesn't raise premiums. This is what you're supposed to do. This would be good advice for Republicans, probably good advice for anybody in politics. Pretend you're talking to your neighbor who hasn't followed this sort of thing. Pretend you talk to somebody who you like and who you respect, who you're not talking down to. You don't think of them as an idiot. You're not trying to whip up their passions. You're just trying to say, look, here is what this legislation would do. Here's why it's a good idea, or here's why it's a bad idea. And just lay it out. I still have faith in people. They will make the right decision, and that they'll see through it. If you say, well, here's why it's demagogic, you'd figure a bill about pre-existing conditions would use the words pre-existing conditions. And the fact that it doesn't is your first clue that, hey, this legislation isn't really what the title is about.
And I love the fact that he can distill it. I mean, you watch floor speeches or even questions of witnesses at committee hearings, and it takes a lot of these people 3, 4, sometimes 5 minutes to even get to the question. And so the fact that you can get it into almost soundbite type length here while still getting all of your key points across is a skill that a lot of people still need to learn. And hopefully they're watching what Dan Crenshaw is doing. All right, let's move on to our second great martini, Jim. And we're going to quote a lot from Allah Pundit over at Hot Air here, as well as the Wall Street Journal, starting with Allah Pundit. They call it the ninja bomb. Do you have any idea how excited my 10-year-old self would have been to know that my country has a ninja bomb? Even now I'm a little woozy. Often military jargon is inscrutable to civilians, but not this time. The flying Ginsu is just what it sounds like. It's a small drone-fired missile, except instead of explosives, it's equipped with blades. 6 big knives shoot out the sides of this thing in the final seconds before impact, shredding everything in its path, including jihadi masterminds. I almost don't believe it's real. Ironically, it's gruesome as the outcome of a ninja bomb strike is apt to be. It's humane by the standards of air power. The point of the weapon is to limit collateral damage by removing bombs from the equation. The Obama administration reportedly began development of it in 2011, the same year Anwar al-Awlaki's 16-year-old son, an American citizen, was killed during a U.S. airstrike targeting a leader of al-Qaeda in Yemen. The Wall Street Journal claims that it was being eyed as a plan B for taking out bin Laden at his compound in residential Abbottabad. And then to the Wall Street Journal. The Wall Street Journal talks about one of the guys being responsible for the USS Cole being taken out, probably by one of these, although the military isn't specifying what munitions were used, and also an Egyptian national who served as al-Qaeda's number 2. But here's the very cool part, Jim. From the Wall Street Journal, one former U.S. official said the weapon addressed a long-standing right seat, left seat problem, suggesting it's theoretically possible to kill someone sitting in the passenger seat of a moving car, but not the driver. So, Jim, this is so cool.
First of all, Greg, let's think of this next time you yell, shotgun. Because now the Pentagon can kill you without disrupting the drive for everyone else. And isn't that something we've always wanted? I remember there was an interesting. First of all, there are a lot of things that drive me bonkers. I guess I could just say that in general, Greg. There are a lot of things that drive me bonkers in discussions of these sorts of things. But these warmongering Americans and this idea of this reckless disregard. Look. After a while, the U.S. defense industry and the Pentagon we know how to make stuff blow up real good. We've been doing it for a really long time. We all remember the footage of the Persian Gulf War and the cameras on the front of the missile and flying in through the window of the building and the bridge and the crosshairs. We are really, really good at blowing stuff up. But the problem is there are times when the mission and what you want to achieve doesn't require you to blow stuff up as big as possible. You want something more targeted. The bad guys have figured this out, and we see this both when Israel is fighting with Hamas and Hezbollah. Almost every conflict around the world, one side feels the temptation to hide amongst civilians. That if you could use a school, that if you can use a mosque, if you can use some sort of location with lots of women and children around, with lots of civilians around, the United States military is going to hesitate because we are good and decent human beings who don't want to see innocent lives lost. Now, there are times we will make that kind of calculation and we'll decide, okay, the threat presented by this person we're targeting justifies the potential loss of life of all these other people around them. But again, we hate to be in that sort of situation. I remember somebody had made the argument as either a Twitter fight or somewhere on social media. Somebody said, "Oh yeah, what kind of missile would Jesus use?" You know, an argument to be snide about how terrible and warmongering and violent the United States was. And someone had answered, honest to goodness, in absolute seriousness, Jesus would use the new type of Hellfire missiles that is designed to minimize shrapnel and potential risk to people around the target. And whether or not that really fits your idea of what Jesus would do, it did say something about the U.S. military and the Pentagon and all that they were trying to develop weapons that were less deadly, that were more precise, that were much more likely to be able to avoid hurting people who are not enemies of the United States, who are not someone who we want to see killed or something like that. First of all, Ginsu missile. What a wonderful name. What a wonderful idea. And if you actually look at the sort of things coming out of DARPA, this is actually the philosophy of the United States. We don't want bigger, more powerful, more dangerous weapons. We want more precise weapons. We want an ability to hurt the person we're targeting and only the person we're targeting. And so as much as, oh my God, this is so cool and it's great. It sounds like something out of science fiction. By the way, DARPA's doing some amazing stuff that everyone should kind of check out every now and then. Anytime you're like, oh God, how are we going to handle the problems of the future? Just take a look at DARPA. And it's like one part Star Trek, one part Q from Bond movies, and one part, I believe. And it's not even that stuff from up at MIT where you keep watching videos every few months in which they have robots opening doors and stuff like that. You put those two together, we've totally got Skynet. So that's the bad news part. But anyway, just a remarkable development. And again, I think indicates how much the United States has adapted to a very different form of warfare, one that is not going to be fought with tanks and on big battlefields and stuff like that, but often very much involves, quiet surveillance from high up in the air using these sorts of drones and trying to strike them and figuring out how do you take out someone who's a very dangerous individual who's trying to kill Americans without killing all the people around them. And hopefully we'll avoid tragedies and we'll avoid situations where we've had, bombings of weddings and other gatherings and things like that. We've ended up killing a lot of civilians and probably stirring up anti-American sentiment in far-off corners of the world.
All right, Jim, let's move to our final good martini of the day and the week. We head over to Andrew Stiles and the Free Beacon. And Beto O'Rourke, the former Texas congressman, the darling of the media last year. Now the media is souring on him because they got so many other people to fall in love with. The news is just getting worse for Beto. The latest bit of bad news for Beto comes in the form of a Monmouth poll of New Hampshire primary voters. He's tied for 6th place, along with Senators Cory Booker and Amy Klobuchar, winning the support of just 2% of poll respondents, which is getting dangerously close to statistically insignificant territory. It's also not much better than truly insignificant candidates, such as Congressman Tim Ryan, former Governor John Hickenlooper, and random Silicon Valley bro Andrew Yang, who are all polling at 1%. O'Rourke, who had at one point been polling as high as 3rd place in national polls and occasionally cracking double digits, has also recently been surpassed by Senators Kamala Harris and Elizabeth Warren, both in New Hampshire and in national surveys. The Monmouth poll showed Warren in 4th place at 8%, ahead of Harris at 6%, but slightly trailing Pete Buttigieg at 9%. Former Vice President Joe Biden continues to dominate the field, polling down 36% in New Hampshire, comfortably ahead of Bernie Sanders, who sits at 18%. So, Jim, the sad trombone just continues here for Beto.
Yeah, and I think this news today, this assessment from the Free Beacon, aligns well with something that was like the one. You ever really enjoy something, but it also made you outraged at the exact same time? Politico has a really detailed profile of Beto O'Rourke, and you're like, oh God, not another one. Well, this one is about how Beto O'Rourke is actually a not terribly accomplished individual, Greg.
No.
Breaking news, shocking, that he has a history of falling upward and that he's coasting along on charisma and optimism and promises and all that kind of stuff, that he never talks much about his life because his past life and past accomplishments, because there really aren't that many. And when he talks about his past life, he mostly talks about the Texas Senate race. It's as if he appeared out of nowhere. He came down from the heavens in early 2018. Now, those of us who remember anything about the 2018 Senate campaign down in Texas, certainly, when I wrote about it and a good portion of when, right of center publications wrote about it, we didn't just discuss the DUI, although that was a big chunk of it. I said there was a room for an alternative narrative aside from the Lone Star Jesus Golden Boy narrative that you were getting in most of these mainstream media publications, that basically painted Beto O'Rourke as a child of privilege. His father was a well-connected judge. In addition to the DUI, people forget there was burglary, there was other things, other criminal charges that were generally dropped with minimal consequence, but you kind of wonder if everybody would have gotten that kind of lenient assessment of it. Went to boarding school, went to fine schools, and then he, hung out in New York City. We all saw the footage of the band and the skateboarding and all that kind of stuff. But, he was not an enormously accomplished businessman. Tried starting up an alternative weekly newspaper, that kind of flopped. Ended up doing web design for El Paso businesses, and that did reasonably well. A lot of folks don't know his net worth is in the neighborhood of $10 million. He married into a billionaire's family. And a good portion of his El Paso city council career was built on eminent domain and clearing out the barrio and helping out big, powerful developers, which doesn't really fit this golden boy who speaks for all of us. Hey, he might be Latino. Look at his first name narrative that you were getting in a chunk of the media in 2018. So on the one hand, I'm loving this. I'm loving the fact that the mainstream media has looked a little bit deeper and suddenly seen the exact same Beto O'Rourke that was obvious to a whole bunch of us last year. But it only took but only in a Democratic presidential primary did it spur them to look a little bit further. And they're coming, lo and behold, it's so they write about it, Greg, as if it's cold fusion, as if it's just this amazing discovery about Beto O'Rourke's life that no one has ever noticed before. And on the one hand, I'm glad Politico wrote this. A little while we talked about Margaret Carlson, who had this, just viciously funny, ripping Beto a new one, saying that every woman recognizes him as the worst boyfriend they've ever had, as this, slacker who was self-involved and kind of a narcissist. And, the Washington Post did that story in which he tried to get his wife to eat poop from the baby, and he claimed that it was guacamole. I mean, you look at this, you're like, what is wrong with this man? Greg, if I had done that, I think, it would have ended either in divorce or attempted homicide. And so the idea that there's, the whole time in 2018, it's, he's this charming, inspiring, he's Kennedy-esque. Yes, in his driving record. That's about it, though. So anyway, I'm glad the mainstream media is catching up. I think Beto O'Rourke is finding it tough. But I'm going to make one cautionary note here, though, which is that I actually think, as much as I'm enjoying the mainstream media piling on and whacking him around like a piñata, I do kind of think that he may be undersold at this point. We'll see how it goes. He looks ridiculous jumping up on the counters of diners in Iowa and stuff like that. But, he's doing the Obama playbook, hope, change, sunny optimism, not too many specifics, we're going to come together and work on that issue, that kind of stuff. But I think a lot of Democrats like that. I think a lot of Democrats are looking for that. They don't want the details. They don't care if he doesn't have white papers and detailed policy experience the way Elizabeth Warren does. He just kind of makes them feel good. And my sneaking suspicion is that counts for a lot in a Democratic presidential primary. Old saying, Republicans want to fall in line, Democrats want to fall in love. So I don't think, don't put dirt on the Beto O'Rourke 2020 campaign yet. Having said that, it is utterly delicious to watch him kind of, flailing after having a hurricane force wind at his back in 2018. All of a sudden, reality is hitting them like a brick wall. Actually, maybe I probably should avoid crashing metaphors when it comes to Beto O'Rourke, right, Greg?
Probably so. But I liked your hope and change reference, because that reminds me that when some folks, usually on the right, of course, pointed out that Barack Obama had no executive experience back in 2008, what did he point to? The fact that he ran a campaign, his own. So
yeah, and there's an actual argument from a supporter who's traveling with Beto in this Politico article, which he says that, it's not just that his greatest accomplishment is not that he lost the Senate race, but how he lost the Senate race. Now, look, let's give a little bit of credit. Best campaign by a Democrat in 30 years in Texas. Only 2-point-something%, close to 3%. But mostly it's like he campaigned really hard, and thus he's qualified to be president. No, that's not the way it's supposed to work. But apparently that's the way Democrats see these things. And if if you make them feel good inside, that is what makes you qualified to be the next commander-in-chief of the United States.
That's right. He forgot Obama rule number 1, win your Senate seat by running against somebody who gets disqualified after they become the nominee. So,
where's Jerry Ryan when Democrats need him?
Oh, Jim Garrity, you're out for a few days. We'll talk to you, Thursday?
Yes. Speaking engagement. Can't say where. It's a secret mission. I'll have more to say when I get back. Everyone have fun without me. May you have lots of all good days and not too many all crazy or all bad days.
Jim Garrity of National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks for being with us today. David French and Alexander DeSanctis will be in for Jim the first few days of next week. If you love the podcast, please leave us a nice review over at iTunes. That helps us out a whole lot. Have a great weekend and tune in again Monday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.